A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippians. Brothers and sisters, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me life is Christ, and death is gain. If I go on living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, and I do not know which I shall choose. I am caught between the two. I long to depart this life and be with Christ, for that is far better. Yet that I remain in the flesh is more necessary for your benefit. Only conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Sometimes it seems like everything goes wrong at once. If there was ever a year to verify that, look at this year. We had presidential impeachment, a global pandemic, and the shutdown that went along with that. We're in an election year, and to top it all off, we just had a Supreme Court justice die 6 weeks before the election. Sometimes it seems like everything goes wrong at once. And I think if we read through the letter to the Philippians, we can see that that was sort of the experience of this community of Christians as well. Right? Paul came to them. He brought them to faith in Christ Jesus. He brought them together as the church in Philippi, and they began to live their life as Christians. Everything was going well. And then Paul left to found new communities. And divisions started to emerge among the Christians in Philippi. They started to feud amongst themselves. And then the Judaizers appeared, these people who said you have to follow the Jewish law to be Christian. What does that mean for Paul? If they're saying you have to be Jewish, Paul said you didn't. Was Paul lying to them the whole time? What is their faith founded on? And as these issues multiply, they start to wonder, we need Paul here. What if Paul were here? He could tell us what we need to hear. He could help us to understand what we need to do. And it's right then that they find out Paul is in prison. He's been thrown into prison for preaching the gospel. Right? We can think of situations in our own life like this, where things seem to be falling apart, going wrong, and we think, if only that one person would come and help me see what to do. So Paul is in prison, and the Philippians send someone to bring him support, to get his advice, and the messenger falls ill when he arrives. He's delayed in coming back to them. They're wondering, what more is going to happen? What more can happen to us? Finally, that messenger returns with this letter from Paul. Paul's still in prison, and to top it off, some people are trying to make matters worse for him. And it's unclear whether or not Paul's going to make it out. It's a very real possibility Paul is going to die in this prison, that he's never going to make it to Philippi to help them out. Their own problems aren't resolved, and now they might lose Paul forever. The Philippians who are telling themselves, we need Paul. We need him here with us to show us what to do. So what does Paul say to them? What does he write back to this community that so desperately longs for him to be with them? He says, whether I live or die, Christ will be glorified. Don't worry so much. Don't worry. It's all going to work out. Right? The Philippians want Paul to be their hero. They want him to come in, to set everything right, to show them the way. But Paul redirects them. He says, it's not about me. I might live, I might die, who knows? It's about Jesus. It's about Jesus Christ. Whether he lives or he dies, Paul knows that he belongs to Christ, so that Christ is glorified in him, whether he lives or dies. It reminds me of one of my favorite scenes from the musical Hamilton. Right? It came out a few years ago. It recently went online this summer, so a number of people have seen it. But in Act 2, it tells the story of the founding of the United States through the life of Alexander Hamilton. And in Act 2, the president, George Washington, announces that he's not going to seek a third term as president. And his advisor, Hamilton, objects. He says, sir, the country is weak. We need a leader. There's war on the horizon with Britain and France. Political parties are forming. He tells Washington that he can be the one to unify the country, to lead it through these coming crises, to guide them, to show them the way. And Washington listens to what Hamilton has to say. He hears him out. He answers some of his objections, but finally he stops him. He says, enough. He tells him, if I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. Washington is able to see something that Hamilton doesn't quite get yet. Washington can see that the country is bigger than just him, just George Washington, and that if he tries to stay on the stage as long as he possibly can, the country's never going to mature. It's never going to move past him, so that eventually when he does have to leave, when he does get forced by death, if nothing else, the country won't be able to move past him. If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. So if we return to Philippi and think about who is Paul in this situation, who is Paul really? Not who is the Paul the Philippians want, but who is Paul really? He's a minister. He's a servant. He's an apostle, one who is sent by another. And we can think of Paul as an icon or a stained glass window, right? He's one through whom the light of Christ shines, but it's still that light of Christ that's shining, not the light of Paul. You know, this a tendency isn't something just the Philippians have, right? So often we love to put our trust in someone or something that we think is going to be able to solve all our problems. It might be a leader, it might be a certain position we hold, an assignment we have, it might be some object or practice we keep. We think if I just have this, I have what I need, everything will be fine. And maybe at one point, we did need it, right? Paul was important for these Philippians in their conversion to the faith. He brought them to Christ. But at the same time, they kept moving forward. And they come to a point where it's no longer Paul they need, but Christ. It's no longer Paul, but Jesus. And Paul recognizes this, so he points to them. He says, whether I live or die, Christ will be glorified. Brothers, Christ will be glorified in us if only we give ourselves to him, not to anything else, to him, and live our lives as his disciples. He's brought each of us this far. Where now is he calling each of us to go?
Dear